I arrived at my son's house without warning on Thanksgiving Day. The thermometer on my dashboard read 10 degrees Fahrenheit. I found my grandson shivering on the street in a t-shirt and shorts, huddled next to the exhaust vent of the heating unit just to stay alive. Inside the house, the fireplace was roaring, and the whole family was eating turkey at the holiday table. I didn't knock. I kicked the door open and said 6 words that turned their faces white. Get out. I sold this house. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect a child from the people who were supposed to love him. My name is Conrad. I am 66 years old, and I spent 40 years of my life pouring concrete and welding steel in the wind tunnels of Chicago. I know what cold feels like. I know the kind of cold that bypasses your skin and settles directly into the marrow of your bones, the kind that makes your joints lock up and your mind go fuzzy. I built half the skyline of this city, and I did it by being tougher than the weather and harder than the materials I worked with. People look at me now and they see an old man in a 10-year-old Ford truck wearing a Carhartt jacket that has seen better decades. They see a retiree who counts his pennies at the hardware store. They don't know that I own 3 commercial skyscrapers in the Loop. They don't know that the company my son works for is a subsidiary of a holding company that I control. I never told them. I wanted my son Brad to build his own character. I wanted him to be a man, not a trust fund baby. Clearly, I failed. It was Thanksgiving Thursday. The wind was coming off Lake Michigan like a razor blade. The forecast said 10 degrees, but with the wind chill, it felt like 20 below zero. It was the kind of day where you don't let a dog outside for more than 5 minutes. I wasn't invited to dinner. My son Brad and his wife Monica had made it clear years ago that I didn't fit their aesthetic. Monica liked fine china and guests who talked about their summer homes in the Hamptons. I talked about structural integrity and union dues, so I wasn't on the guest list. But I missed my grandson. Leo is 10 years old. He is the only good thing that came out of Brad's first marriage before his wife passed away. Leo has my eyes and his mother's gentle heart. He is quiet, observant, and lately he has been looking more and more like a ghost. I had a bad feeling in my gut all morning. Call it instinct. Call it the same sixth sense that tells you a cable is about to snap before it happens. I couldn't sit in my empty house anymore. I grabbed the pumpkin pie I had baked from scratch, got in my truck, and drove to the suburbs. I pulled up to the house. It was a McMansion in Naperville, a big gaudy thing with fake stone columns and too many windows. I paid the down payment on this house 5 years ago, though Brad likes to forget that part. I parked on the street because the driveway was full of luxury cars. Mercedes BMWs likely belonging to Monica's parents and their high society friends. I walked up the driveway, fighting the wind. The snow was crunching under my boots. I was about to ring the doorbell when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. To the left of the garage, hidden behind the perfectly manicured hedges, there was a small dark shape huddled against the side of the house. It looked like a pile of old rags someone had thrown out in the snow. But then the rags moved. I stopped. I squinted through the driving snow. The shape was curled into a tight ball right next to the external fan of the central heating unit. The heat pump was roaring, blowing hot exhaust air out into the freezing yard. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dropped the pie. It shattered on the frozen concrete, but I didn't care. I ran through the snow, my heavy boots sinking deep. Leo. It was Leo. He was sitting on the frozen ground. He wasn't wearing a coat. He wasn't wearing a hat or gloves. He was wearing a thin cotton t-shirt and a pair of gym shorts. His knees were pulled up to his chest, and his arms were wrapped around his legs so tight, his knuckles were white. His skin wasn't pale. It was a translucent shade of blue-gray. He had frost in his eyelashes. Leo! I roared, but the wind took my voice. I reached him and fell to my knees in the snow. The boy didn't even look up. He was staring at the spinning blades of the fan, trying to catch the little bit of waste heat coming from the house. He was shaking so violently that his teeth were clattering together like dice in a cup. "Leo, look at me," I said, grabbing his shoulders. His skin felt like marble. It was the touch of hypothermia. I knew it instantly. I had seen grown men succumb to this on job sites. The confusion, the lethargy, the moment the body decides it is easier to sleep than to fight. I ripped off my heavy canvas jacket and wrapped it around him. It was warm from my body heat, and he leaned into it instinctively. I pulled him into my chest, rubbing his arms, his back, trying to generate friction, trying to restart the furnace of his little body. "Leo, what are you doing out here?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in 30 years. He looked up at me. His eyes were glassy. He tried to speak, but his jaw was locked from the cold. He had to force the words out through chattering teeth. Monica said he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "I broke the gravy boat, the ceramic one. She said I had to wait until they were done eating. She said I didn't deserve a seat at the table." I felt something snap inside my brain. It was a physical sensation, like a high-tension wire parting under load. "How long, Leo?" I asked. "How long have you been out here?" "Since the turkey came out," he whispered. "That was at least an hour ago. An hour in 10-degree weather with exposed skin. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't discipline. This was attempted murder. They had put a 10-year-old boy out like garbage to freeze to death while they feasted on the other side of the wall." I looked at the window above us, the dining room window. I could see the golden glow of the chandelier. I could see the silhouette of Brad raising a glass of wine. I could see Monica laughing, throwing her head back. They were warm. They were full. And they were killing my grandson. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I acted. I scooped Leo up in my arms. He was light, too light. He had lost weight since I last saw him. I wrapped my coat tighter around him, burying his face in my flannel shirt. "Hang on, buddy," I growled. "Grandpa is here." I marched to the front door. It was a solid oak door with a decorative glass insert. Expensive. Heavy. Locked. I didn't look for a key. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't want to give them the courtesy of a warning. I shifted Leo's weight to my left arm, stepped back, and channeled 40 years of breaking concrete into my right leg. I kicked the door right at the lock plate. There was a sound like a gunshot. The wood splintered. The frame gave way. The door swung inward with a violence that smashed it against the interior wall, cracking the plaster. Bam! I stepped into the foyer. The heat hit me instantly. It smelled like roasted sage, rosemary, and expensive perfume. It smelled like comfort. It smelled like betrayal. The dining room was directly to the right. The scene froze. It was like a painting of the Last Supper if the Last Supper had been attended by vultures in designer clothes. There were 10 people at the table. Brad sat at the head, a carving knife in his hand. Monica was to his right, wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my truck. Her parents, whom I call the aristocrats, were there holding crystal goblets of red wine. There was roasted turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, green bean casserole. It was a picture of abundance. And then there was me. An old man covered in snow, wearing a dirty flannel shirt, holding a half-frozen child, wrapped in an oversized coat. The silence lasted for 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Then the screaming started. "Oh my God," Monica shrieked, dropping her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. "You lunatic! You broke my door! You just broke my door!" She didn't look at the boy. She didn't look at the blue tint of his lips. She looked at the door jamb. Brad stood up, his face flushing red. "Dad, what the hell is wrong with you? You can't just barge in here. We have guests." I didn't say a word. Not yet. I walked past them, my heavy boots leaving trails of gray slush on their pristine Persian rug. I walked straight to the living room sofa, a white velvet thing they never let anyone sit on. I laid Leo down on it. "Don't put him there," Monica yelled, scrambling up from her chair. "He's dirty. He's filthy. Get him off my sofa." I turned around. The rage in my chest was cold now. It was ice cold. It was the kind of calm you get right before you demolish a building. I looked at Monica. Then I looked at Brad. "He's freezing," I said. My voice was low, gravelly. "He has hypothermia. You put him outside in 10-degree weather in a t-shirt." "He broke my gravy boat," Monica snapped, marching toward me. Her face was twisted in an ugly snarl. "It was a wedding gift from my mother. He needed a timeout. He knows the rules. If you can't behave, you don't eat." "A timeout is 5 minutes in a corner," I said. "Not an hour in a freezer." "He's fine," Brad said, waving his hand dismissively. "He's just being dramatic. He always does this to get attention. Look at him curling up like a baby." I looked back at Leo. He wasn't being dramatic. His eyes were rolling back in his head. He was shaking so hard, the whole sofa was vibrating. Monica's father, a man who has never worked a day of manual labor in his life, cleared his throat. "This is absurd. Brad, call the police. Get this violent old man out of here. He's ruining Thanksgiving." "Yes," Monica hissed. "Call 911. He broke into our house. That's breaking and entering. That's assault. I want him arrested." Brad pulled out his phone. He looked at me with a sneer. "You've done it now, Dad. You always have to make a scene. You're jealous, aren't you? You're jealous of what I've built. You're jealous that I have a real family and money, and you're just a sad old construction worker living on Social Security." I watched him dial the 3 numbers. I watched him put the phone to his ear. "Hello, police," Brad said, his voice taking on that fake, panicked tone victims use. "Yes, my father broke into my home. He kicked down the door. He's violent. He's threatening my wife. Please send someone immediately." He hung up and smirked at me. "They'll be here in 5 minutes. You better leave, old man. Go back to your shack." I didn't move. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I have on speed dial. It's not the police. It's Dr. Thorne, the head of pediatrics at St. Jude's, a man I've played poker with for 20 years. "Jim," I said. "I need an ambulance at my son's address. Severe hypothermia. Possible frostbite. 10-year-old male." "Yes." "Now." I hung up. "Who was that?" Monica asked, narrowing her eyes. "A real doctor," I said. "Because unlike you, I care if the boy lives or dies." Monica laughed. It was a sharp, cruel sound. "You're being ridiculous. He's just cold. He can go warm up in the garage if he wants. But he is not ruining my dinner party. Get him off the sofa." She reached out to grab Leo's arm. She was going to pull him off the velvet. I intercepted her hand. My hand is a catcher's mitt of calluses and scar tissue. I grabbed her wrist. I didn't squeeze hard enough to break it, but I squeezed hard enough to let her know that the strength of a man who bends rebar for a living is not something to test. "Don't touch him," I growled. "Ow!" she screamed, pulling away. "Brad, he assaulted me. Did you see that? He grabbed me." Brad charged around the table. He was holding the carving knife still. He probably didn't realize it, or maybe he did. He pointed it at me. "Get out of my house, Dad, now, or I swear to God I will make you regret it." "Your house?" I asked. "Yes, my house," Brad shouted. "I bought this house, I pay the mortgage, I allow you to visit out of pity, but that ends today. You are banned. You are dead to us." I looked around the room. I looked at the crown molding I had inspected myself before the purchase. I looked at the floors. I looked at the walls. "You think you bought this house," I said quietly. "I signed the papers," Brad spat. "You signed the deed as a tenant," I said. What are you talking about, you senile old fool? Monica's mother piped up. She was eating a piece of turkey, not even pausing for the drama. Brad owns this estate. I looked at Brad. He looked confident, arrogant. He really believed it. He had forgotten everything. 5 years ago, Brad came to me begging. He wanted to marry Monica. She wouldn't marry him unless he had a house in this specific zip code. He didn't have the credit. He didn't have the down payment. He had nothing. I put down $200,000 cash for the deposit. I created a trust, the Helix Trust, to purchase the property. I let Brad sign as the primary occupant, and I set up a lease agreement where he paid $1 a year so he could pretend he owned it. I did it to give him dignity. I did it so he could start his family with a leg up. I stared him right in the eyes. I bought this house, Brad, through the Helix Trust. Do you remember the Helix Trust? Brad blinked. He hesitated. The name sounded familiar, but he was too drunk on wine and ego to place it. That's just paperwork, Brad stammered. It's my house. Everyone knows it's my house. I looked at Monica. She was rubbing her wrist, glaring at Leo. Get that brat out of here, she hissed. He's dripping melting snow on the cushions. That was it. That was the moment. The last thread of my patience snapped. I looked at these people. These monsters eating turkey while a child froze. They weren't family. They were parasites, and I had been feeding them for too long. I stood up to my full height. I'm 6'4". I cast a shadow over the entire table. The room went silent. I looked at Brad. I looked at Monica. And I delivered the news. Get out. I sold this house. They stared at me. What? Brad laughed nervously. You're crazy. You can't sell my house. I sold it this morning, I lied. Well, it was a half lie. I had made the decision this morning. The paperwork was just a formality I would handle with a phone call. As the sole trustee of the Helix Trust, I had absolute power to liquidate assets. I pulled out my phone again. This time I called Abernathy, my lawyer, the shark. Abernathy, I said into the phone loud enough for everyone to hear. Execute Order 13 on the Naperville property. Immediate eviction. Yes, tonight. Use the emergency clause for property damage and criminal activity. I paused, looking at Monica. And call the sheriff. We have a case of child endangerment and trespassing. Brad's face went the color of the mashed potatoes. Dad, stop, he said, his voice losing its edge. Who are you talking to? You have 5 minutes, I said, pocketing the phone. 5 minutes for what? Monica screeched. To grab whatever you can carry and get off my property, I said. This is illegal, Monica's father shouted, standing up and spilling his wine. You can't evict people on Thanksgiving. We have rights. We are guests. You are trespassers, I said, and you just tortured a child. The police are already on their way for the breaking and entering call you made, Brad. When they get here, I'm going to show them Leo. I'm going to show them the fan outside. And then I'm going to show them the deed to this house. Brad dropped the knife. It clattered onto the floor. Dad, you're joking, right? This is a sick joke. Look at me, Brad, I said. He looked. He saw the hard lines of my face. He saw the look of a man who has fired hundreds of people, who has negotiated with mobsters and unions and billionaires. Does it look like I'm joking? Sirens wailed in the distance. They were getting louder. The ambulance is coming for Leo, I said. And the police are coming for you. If I were you, I'd start packing. Because once the sun comes up tomorrow, the locks will be changed, and anything left inside belongs to me. Monica looked at Brad. Do something, she screamed. He's crazy. He's going to ruin everything. Brad looked at me. For the first time, he looked scared. He looked like the little boy who used to hide behind my leg when it thundered. But I didn't feel the urge to protect him anymore. I looked at the shivering boy on the sofa, the boy who wasn't allowed to eat, and I felt nothing for my son but disgust. "I'm not ruining everything," I said calmly. "I'm fixing a mistake I made 5 years ago." The sirens cut their engines outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the broken front door, illuminating the foyer. Heavy footsteps crunched up the walk. "Police," a voice shouted. I turned my back on my son. I knelt down next to Leo. I brushed the wet hair off his forehead. "It's okay, Leo," I whispered. "We're leaving, and we're never coming back to this cold place again." The officers walked in, hands on their holsters, looking at the broken door. "What's going on here?" the sergeant asked. Brad opened his mouth to speak, to spin his lie, to play the victim. But I stood up. I pointed a finger at Brad. "I want to report a crime," I said, "and I want these squatters removed from my property." The look on Monica's face as the reality hit her was worth every penny of the $200,000 I was about to lose on this house. But this was just the beginning. They thought this was about a house. They didn't know I was about to dismantle their entire lives dollar by dollar. The police sirens were still a distant wail, fading in and out against the howling wind. But inside the foyer, the air was static and heavy, charged with a violence that hadn't yet fully unleashed itself. I stood my ground, my boots dripping melting snow onto the hardwood, creating a dirty puddle that seemed to offend my daughter-in-law more than the fact that a child was freezing to death on her sofa. Brad looked at me, and then he looked at the shattered doorframe. For a second, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who would come to me when he scraped his knee looking for comfort. But that flicker died instantly, smothered by the man he had chosen to become. He didn't see a father standing there. He saw a threat to his ego. He saw an old man in a stained jacket daring to challenge his kingdom. He started to laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a wet, ugly noise that bubbled up from his throat, filled with condescension and a terrifying sort of pity. He shook his head, looking at his guests, looking at Monica's parents, as if inviting them to share in the joke. "I am so sorry." "Everyone," Brad said, his voice dripping with fake apology. "I really didn't want you to see this. My father has been struggling lately. We suspect it is early-onset Alzheimer's. He gets confused. He forgets where he lives. He forgets who owns what." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was the coward's weapon. He was trying to invalidate my reality by questioning my sanity. He wanted to turn me into a senile old fool so that nothing I said would matter. "I am not confused, Brad," I said, my voice low and steady. "I know exactly what day it is. I know exactly who paid for this roof over your head, and I know exactly what kind of man leaves his son out in the cold." Brad sneered. He walked past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder, and headed toward his home office. I watched him go. I knew what he was doing. He was going for his shield. He was going for the piece of paper that he thought made him a king. Monica's mother, a woman who wore pearls to breakfast and had never washed a dish in her life, stepped forward. She held her wine glass like a scepter. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my calloused hands, on the grease stain on my jeans, on the worn leather of my boots. "It is just sad, really," she said, her voice high and nasal, "to see a man reach this age and have nothing to show for it but bitterness. You must be so jealous of Brad. He has achieved so much. He has a beautiful home, a beautiful wife, a career. And you have what? A truck that barely starts, and a lonely house full of dust." Her husband, a man with soft hands and a softer spine, chimed in. "It is class envy, pure and simple. He can't stand that his son outgrew him. He can't stand that Brad is a success while he spent his life playing in the mud. You should be proud of him, Conrad. Instead, you break into his home like a common criminal because you can't handle his wealth." I looked at them. I looked at their expensive clothes and their empty eyes. They didn't know. They didn't know that the office building where her husband's law firm rented space was one of my properties. They didn't know what the country club they belonged to, had hired my company to reinforce their foundation last year. They saw a laborer. They saw a failure. I didn't correct them. I didn't pull out my bank balance. I let them talk. I let them reveal the black rot in their souls because every word they said was just more fuel for the fire I was about to light. Jealousy, I repeated softly. You think I am jealous of a man who abuses children. You think I am jealous of a mortgage he can't pay and a life built on credit. Brad came storming back into the room. He was holding a thick envelope. He ripped it open, his hands shaking with rage. He pulled out a document, the blue legal paper crinkling in his grip. He marched up to me and shoved it in my face. "Read it, old man," he shouted. "Read it and weep." It was the deed, the title to the house. I looked at it. I saw his signature at the bottom. I saw the date. I saw the stamp of the county clerk. "It says Bradley Vance," he yelled, spit flying from his lips. "It says my name. I own this house. I own this land. You are nothing but a trespasser. You are a delusional old man who thinks he can push me around." I looked at the paper. I knew that document better than he did. I had paid the lawyers to draft it. I had set up the shell company that held the lien. "Look at the lender, Brad," I said calmly. "Look at the lien holder." He didn't look. He didn't care. He was too busy waving the paper around like a victory flag. "It doesn't matter what you say," he spat. "I have the deed, this is my property, and you are leaving." Monica stepped up beside him. She looked empowered by the piece of paper. She looked at me with pure hatred. She felt safe now. She felt like the queen of the castle again. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out before I tell the police you hit me. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure you die in a state-run facility where no one knows your name." Then she looked at the sofa. She looked at Leo. The boy was starting to stir. The warmth of the room and my jacket were bringing him back from the edge, but he was still shivering, his eyes wide with terror. He was looking at his father, looking for protection, and finding only rage. "And take that little mistake with you," Monica said, pointing a manicured finger at Leo. "I don't want him here. He ruins everything. He ruins every holiday. He is just like his mother was weak and pathetic." "Don't you talk about her," I warned. My voice was a rumble in my chest. "I will talk about whoever I want in my house," she screamed. She lunged toward the sofa. She wasn't going to check on him. She wasn't going to comfort him. Her hand was raised. She was going to grab him. She was going to drag him off her precious white velvet furniture because he was dripping melted snow onto the fabric. She was going to put her hands on a child who was already half dead from her cruelty. That was the line. That was the point of no return. I moved. For a man of 66, I am fast. You have to be fast on a construction site. You have to be fast when a beam swings or a cable snaps. I didn't think about it. I didn't weigh the consequences. I simply reacted to a threat. I intercepted her. My hand shot out and clamped around her forearm. I didn't grab her gently. I didn't try to guide her away. I gripped her. My fingers hardened by decades of handling rebar and sledgehammers locked onto her arm like a steel vise. I felt the delicate bones of her wrist beneath her silk sleeve. I felt her tendon snap tight as she tried to pull away. I stopped her cold. She gasped, her eyes going wide with shock. She tried to yank her arm back, but I didn't budge. I held her there, suspended in her act of violence. "Let go of me," she shrieked. "You are hurting me!" "You were going to touch him," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried across the room like thunder. "You were going to put your hands on him again." Brad dropped the deed. It fluttered to the floor, forgotten. He saw me holding his wife. He saw the physical dominance I had over her, the raw strength that he had always mocked, but secretly feared. "Let her go," Brad shouted. He charged at me. He threw a punch. It was a sloppy, angry swing, the kind of punch thrown by a man who has never been in a real fight in his life. He aimed for my face. I didn't let go of Monica. I simply turned my shoulder, absorbing the blow. It hit me on the upper arm. It felt like nothing. It felt like a bird flying into a window. Brad recoiled, shaking his hand. He had hurt himself hitting me. He stared at me, stunned by the density of my body, by the fact that I hadn't even flinched. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, the son I had paid for, the son I had protected. And I realized he wasn't just ungrateful. He was weak. He was a hollow man made of paper deeds and credit cards. I shoved Monica away. I didn't throw her, but I pushed her with enough force that she stumbled back, tripping over her high heels. She fell onto the expensive Persian rug, landing hard on her hip. She screamed as if I had shot her. "Brad, help! He is killing me! He is crazy!" The in-laws were backing away, their faces pale, clutching their wine glasses as if they were shields. They were witnessing violence they had only ever seen on television, and it terrified them. They realized suddenly that their money and their status meant absolutely nothing in this room. Brad scrambled backward, putting the dining table between us. He was breathing hard, his eyes darting around for a weapon. He grabbed a heavy crystal candlestick holder. "Get out," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Get out, or I will kill you." I stepped toward him. I didn't run. I walked, slow, deliberate, like a glacier. "You want to kill me, Brad?" I asked. "You want to kill the man who taught you how to walk? You want to kill the man who paid for that suit you are wearing? Go ahead. Swing." He raised the candlestick. His hand was shaking so bad the crystal was rattling. But he didn't swing. He couldn't. He was a bully, and bullies crumble when they face something harder than themselves. He saw my eyes. He saw that I wasn't afraid of him. He saw that I was ready to tear this house down around his ears if I had to. He lowered his arm. He started to cry. It was a pathetic, frustrated sobbing. "Why are you doing this?" he whined. "Why do you have to ruin everything? We were happy. We were having a nice dinner. Why couldn't you just stay away?" "Because you broke the contract, Brad," I said. "What contract?" he sniffled. "The unspoken one," I said. "The one where I give you everything and in exchange you act like a decent human being. The one where you protect your child. You broke it. And now I am revoking the terms." Monica was crawling backward on the floor away from me. She looked at me with pure venom. "You will go to jail for this," she hissed. "The police are coming. You assaulted me. You broke into our home. You are going to die in prison." I looked down at her. I picked up the deed from the floor. I held it up. "You think this paper protects you," I said. "You think this makes you safe." I ripped the deed in half. The sound of the tearing paper was loud in the silent room. Brad gasped. "You can't do that. That's a legal document." "It's a copy," I said. "The original is in my safe deposit box, along with the trust agreement you signed without reading, along with the power of attorney you signed 5 years ago because you were too lazy to handle your own taxes." I let the torn pieces of paper fall like snow onto the floor. "You don't own this house, Brad. You are a tenant. You are a guest. And your lease just expired." The sirens were loud now. They were right outside. I could see the flashing lights reflecting off the snow through the broken door. "They are here," Monica shouted, scrambling to her feet. "Thank God." Officer in here! Help us!" She ran toward the door, limping slightly for dramatic effect. I turned back to the sofa. Leo was watching me. His eyes were wide, but he wasn't shaking as much. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. He had never seen anyone stand up to Monica. He had never seen anyone make his father back down. "It is okay, Leo," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "The cavalry is here." But the cavalry wasn't coming for me. Monica was already at the door, screaming at the first uniformed officer who stepped through the wreckage of the frame. "He is in there," she shrieked, pointing a finger back at me. "He is violent. He hit me. He threatened to kill us. He has a weapon. She was lying, of course. I didn't have a weapon. My hands were my weapons. But the police didn't know that. They saw a broken door. They saw a hysterical woman in an expensive dress. They saw an old man in dirty clothes standing over a child. The officer stepped into the foyer, his hand resting on his holster. Another officer came in behind him. "Sir," the officer barked, "step away from the child. Put your hands where I can see them." I stood up slowly. I raised my hands. I didn't want to get shot in front of my grandson. "I am complying, officer," I said calmly. "Get on the ground," the officer shouted. "Now, on your knees." Brad started laughing again. It was a manic, triumphant sound. "That's right," Brad yelled. "Arrest him. Take him away. He is a maniac." I looked at the officer. I looked at Brad. I looked at Monica, who was smirking through her fake tears. They thought they had won. They thought the uniform and the badge were on their side because they lived in the big house and I drove the old truck. I slowly lowered myself to my knees. The floor was hard, but as I knelt there with my hands in the air, I wasn't afraid. I was calculating. I was planning. Because they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had invited the law into a house built on fraud, and I knew exactly which loose thread to pull to make the whole thing unravel. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrists, a sound that seemed to echo louder than the sirens wailing outside. I didn't resist. I didn't fight. I knew the drill. When the police walk into a room and see a shattered door, a crying woman in a silk dress, and a large man in dirty work clothes, they don't ask for a backstory. They secure the threat. And in their eyes, I was the threat. "Stay down," the officer barked, pressing a hand firmly on my shoulder. "You are being detained for breaking and entering and domestic assault. You have the right to remain silent." I remained silent, but my eyes were screaming. I watched as the second officer moved toward Monica. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving with practiced sobs. "He is crazy," she wailed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He just snapped. He broke down our door. He grabbed me. Look at my arm." She pulled up her sleeve to reveal the red marks where my fingers had gripped her. The officer's face hardened. He saw bruises on a woman. He didn't see the woman who had just tried to drag a hypothermic child off a sofa. He didn't see the monster who had left a boy to freeze. "Is he drunk?" the officer asked Brad. Brad seized the opportunity. He stepped forward, adjusting his tie, playing the role of the beleaguered head of the household. He has a history of drinking. Officer Brad lied smoothly, and he has been having episodes lately. Dementia. Paranoia. We tried to keep him away for his own safety, but he became obsessed. He thinks we are hurting his grandson. The officer looked at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Is that true, sir?" he asked me. I looked at Brad. I looked at the man I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had bailed out of debt 3 times before he was 25. I saw the relief in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought if he could paint me as a senile drunk, the nightmare would end, and he could go back to his turkey dinner. "Check the boy," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the rage that was burning a hole in my stomach. "Forget about me. Check the boy on the couch." The officer glanced at Leo. Leo was sitting up now, wrapped in my oversized coat. He looked small and terrified. His color was returning slightly, but he still looked like a ghost. "Leo," Monica said sharply, her voice cutting through her fake tears. "Tell the officer what happened. Tell him how Grandpa scared you. Tell him how you fell in the snow playing and Grandpa dragged you inside and broke the door." It was a command, not a request. I saw Leo flinch. He looked at Monica, and I saw the terror in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of the police. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of her. He knew what happened to little boys who disobeyed Monica. They got locked out in the cold. They lost their dinner. Or worse. Leo looked at the officer. He looked at me. I tried to send him strength with my eyes. I tried to tell him it was okay to speak. But he was 10 years old, and he was surrounded by giants who held his life in their hands. I fell, Leo whispered, looking at his knees. Grandpa broke the door. He was yelling. Brad let out a long sigh as if a great weight had been lifted. See, Brad said. The boy is fine. He was just playing outside. My father is delusional. He turned a simple accident into a home invasion. The officer nodded. He had heard enough. He pulled me up to my feet. Let's go, sir, he said. We are taking you down to the station to sort this out. Wait, I said. I dug my heels into the floor. The ambulance. I called an ambulance. The boy has hypothermia. You need to let the paramedics see him. As if on cue, the red lights of the ambulance flashed through the broken doorway. 2 EMTs walked in carrying a medical bag. Who called for a bus? The lead paramedic asked, looking around the chaotic room. I did, I said. The boy, check his core temperature, check his extremities for frostbite. Monica stood up. She wiped her eyes instantly, the tears vanishing as if she had turned off a faucet. She stepped between the paramedics and Leo. I am his stepmother, she declared, her voice dripping with authority. And I did not authorize this. The boy is fine. He is just shaken up because of this violent intruder. We have a family doctor. We don't need you. Please leave. The paramedic looked at the police officer. The officer shrugged. It is her house, ma'am, the officer said. If the legal guardian refuses treatment, there is not much you can do unless there is an obvious life-threatening injury. But there was no blood. There were no broken bones. Hypothermia is a silent killer. It hides in the blood. It doesn't look like an emergency until the heart stops. I refuse treatment, Brad added, standing next to his wife. Get out of my house. Everyone. Just take him away. He pointed at me. The paramedics hesitated, looking at Leo. Leo didn't move. He didn't ask for help. He just shivered. We can't force it, the paramedic said quietly. He shot me an apologetic look and turned to leave. They were leaving him. They were leaving him with the wolves. I felt the officer tugging on my arm. Move it, the officer said. I walked. I had no choice. If I fought them, I would get charged with resisting arrest. I would get a felony. And a felon cannot be a legal guardian. I needed to be smart. I needed to play the long game. As they marched me past the sofa, I stopped. The officer tried to push me, but I planted my feet like concrete pillars. I looked down at Leo. Listen to me, Leo, I said. Monica tried to step in. Don't you talk to him. Shut up, I roared. The volume of my voice made the crystal chandelier rattle. Even the police officers took a step back. I looked at my grandson. I am not leaving you, I said. Do you hear me? I am going to walk out this door, but I am coming back. I am coming back with a lawyer. I am coming back with a judge. I am coming back with an army. You just hold on. You survive. Do you understand? Leo looked up. A single tear rolled down his blue cheek. He nodded. Just once. A tiny, imperceptible nod. That was all I needed. Let's go, the officer said, shoving me toward the door. I walked out into the freezing night. The wind hit my face, drying the sweat on my forehead. The snow was falling harder now, covering the tracks I had made, covering the evidence of my arrival. Brad followed us to the porch. He stood in the doorway, the heat from the house billowing out around him. He crossed his arms, shivering in his suit. Don't come back, Dad, he shouted over the wind. If I see your truck on this street again, I will get a restraining order. You are done. You have nothing. You are a sad, lonely old man, and you are going to die alone. I stopped at the police cruiser. The officer opened the back door. I looked back at the house. It was a magnificent structure. Brick and stone. 3 stories. 5,000 square feet. It was the kind of house that announced to the world that you had made it. It was the symbol of Brad's success. But as I looked at it, I didn't see a home. I saw a spreadsheet. I saw a file in a cabinet in my lawyer's office downtown. I remembered the day we closed on the property 5 years ago. Brad was so excited. He was popping champagne with Monica. He was too busy taking selfies in front of the sold sign to read the paperwork. He just wanted the keys. He just wanted to post it on social media. I remembered sitting across from the notary. I remembered handing over the cashier's check for $200,000. And I remembered sliding the lease agreement across the table. "It's just a formality, Brad," I had said. "For tax purposes. It puts the liability on the trust, not you. It protects you." He had laughed. "Sure, Dad, whatever. Where do I sign?" He didn't read it. He didn't read the clause that defined him as a tenant at will. He didn't read the clause that stated the lease could be terminated immediately for criminal activity or conduct detrimental to the property. He didn't read the fine print that listed the sole beneficiary and trustee of the Helix Corporation. Me. Conrad Vance. I looked at Brad shivering on the porch of a house he thought he owned. He thought he was the king of the castle. He didn't know he was just a squatter in a very expensive hotel, and checkout time was tomorrow morning. "You keep the deed, Brad," I shouted back at him. My voice was calm, almost cheerful. "You frame it. It will make a nice souvenir." He gave me the finger and slammed the broken door as best he could. The officer pushed my head down and guided me into the back of the cruiser. The seat was hard plastic. The cage smelled like stale coffee and fear. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back at my son. I looked at the second-floor window. Leo's room. The light was off. I closed my eyes and began to draft the email to Abernathy in my head. I wasn't just going to evict them. That was too easy. That was just a slap on the wrist. I was going to audit them. The Helix Corporation didn't just own the house. It owned the car Brad drove. It held the controlling interest in the construction firm where Brad was a vice president. I had set it all up to give him a legacy, a safety net. I had built a golden cage for him, hoping he would grow into it. Instead, he had used it to torture a child. So now I was going to turn the cage into a vice. The officer in the front seat looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You shouldn't have kicked the door in, old-timer," he said. "You made a mess for yourself." I leaned back against the hard seat. "Son," I said, "you have no idea. The mess hasn't even started yet. I wasn't worried about the charges. Breaking and entering into your own property isn't a crime. Damaging a door you paid for isn't vandalism." Once Abernathy got to the station with the binder of documents he kept for me, the charges would dissolve like snow in April. But Brad was about to find out that the winter was just beginning. I sat in the dark watching the suburban streetlights flicker past. I felt the phantom weight of Leo in my arms. I felt the ice of his skin. And I made a promise to the universe. By this time tomorrow, Brad would wish he had frozen outside instead of Leo. Because the cold outside was nothing compared to the financial blizzard I was about to unleash on his life. I smiled in the darkness of the police car. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found the door to the sheep pen unlocked. "Drive fast, officer," I whispered. "I have work to do." I sat in the cab of my 1999 Ford F-150. The heater was blasting, trying to thaw the chill that the police station holding cell had settled into my joints. They had cut me loose after 2 hours. It turns out, when your lawyer threatens the precinct captain with a civil rights lawsuit before he even has his morning coffee doors open. I watched the snow falling on the windshield, thick, heavy flakes burying the hood. It was midnight. The start of Black Friday. The day everyone goes out to buy things they do not need with money they do not have. My son was probably sleeping in his warm bed, thinking he had won. He probably thought I was shivering in a jail cell learning my lesson. He was wrong. I wasn't shivering. I was hunting. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a burner phone. I didn't use my main line for this. Not because I was afraid of being traced, but because I wanted a clean line to the devil. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang once. Abernathy. A voice answered. It wasn't a sleepy voice. It was crisp, alert, and sounded like a billable hour. It is done, I said. My voice was raspy, stripped of any emotion. Did they process you? Abernathy asked. Released without charge pending further investigation, I said. You have the paperwork ready. I have the paperwork, Conrad Abernathy said. But are you sure? This is the nuclear option. We are talking about total asset stripping. If we pull this trigger, there is no putting the bullet back in the chamber. I looked at the snow piling up on the wiper blades. I saw Leo's blue lips. I saw the way he curled into a ball to fit inside my coat. I saw the gravy boat Monica cared more about than a human life. I want him destitute, Abernathy, I said. I want him to wake up tomorrow morning and own nothing but the pajamas on his back. Understood, Abernathy said. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard in the background, the sound of a predator sharpening its claws. Let us go down the list. Item 1. The residence at Naperville. Terminate the lease I ordered. Invoke Clause 13, Section B. Criminal negligence and property damage. File the eviction notice with the sheriff's office at 9 a.m. sharp. I want the locks changed by noon. Hire a private security firm to stand guard. If he tries to enter, have him arrested for trespassing. Done, Abernathy said. Item 2. Employment. He is the vice president of operations at Sterling Construction, I said. Sterling is a shell company under the Helix umbrella. I know the structure, Conrad Abernathy said dryly. I built it. Fire him, I said. Cause. Gross misconduct. Moral turpitude. Use the police report from tonight. An executive who gets arrested for child endangerment is a liability. Cut his severance. Cut his benefits. And freeze his company expense accounts immediately. He drives a company car, doesn't he? A 2023 Range Rover, Abernathy confirmed. Repossess it, I said. Send a tow truck to the driveway tonight. I want him to look out the window and see his status symbol being dragged away in the snow. That might be excessive, Abernathy mused, but effective. Consider it done. Item 3. Liquid assets. This was the big one. Brad thought he had savings. He thought he had investments. He didn't know that the trust fund he dipped into the allowance I had set up for him under the guise of dividend payments from a family investment was entirely discretionary. Freeze the trust, I said. Cut off the monthly stipend. And call the bank. The black card he carries. The one he uses to buy Monica her jewelry and her wine. It is a supplementary card on my account. Cancel it. Flag it for fraud. Fraud, Abernathy asked. He used my money to abuse my grandson, I said. That is fraudulent use in my book. Shut it down. I want him to go to buy a coffee tomorrow and feel the shame of a declined transaction. I paused. I took a breath. The air in the truck tasted like old metal and resolve. And Abernathy, I added. Yes, the in-laws, Monica's parents, the ones who called me a failure. I am listening. They run a boutique investment firm in the city, don't they? They do, Abernathy said. Not a very successful one, but they maintain appearances. They rent office space in the Millennium Tower. Who owns the Millennium Tower, I asked, though I already knew the answer. We do, Conrad Abernathy said. Or rather, Helix Corp does. Check their lease, I said. I seem to recall they are month to month because they were late on payments last year. I am checking now, Abernathy said. There was a pause. Yes. month to month. Terminate it, I said. Give them 30 days, and hike the rent on the remaining units in the building just to send a message. I want them scrambling. I want them to feel the ground shake under their feet. You are declaring war on 3 fronts, Conrad Abernathy said. This is expensive. I have $8 million in liquid capital sitting in the Helix accounts, I said. I have 3 buildings generating revenue while I sleep. I can afford a war. What I cannot afford is to let those people think they got away with hurting a child. Very well, Abernathy said. The paperwork is being filed electronically as we speak. The notifications will start hitting their emails and phones within the hour. By sunrise, Bradley Vance will be a ghost. One more thing, I said. Yes. Leo. What about the boy? I need custody, I said. Emergency custody. I don't care what it costs. I don't care who we have to bribe or what judge we have to wake up. I want an order of protection. I want temporary guardianship. He is at St. Jude's Hospital right now. I don't want Brad or Monica getting within 100 feet of him. That is more complicated, Abernathy warned. Brad is the biological father. The courts favor the biological parent, unless we can prove imminent danger. The boy had a core temperature of 94 degrees, I snapped. He was malnourished. He was terrified. That is imminent danger. Get the hospital records. Get the statement from Dr. Thorne. And get the police report where they refused medical treatment for a dying child. I will make the calls, Abernathy said. I have a judge who owes me a favor. We might be able to get an emergency hearing by Monday. Until then, keep the boy in the hospital. It is the safest place. Good, I said. Conrad Abernathy said, his voice softening just a fraction. Are you sure about this? You are burning down the village to save the castle. You are destroying your son. I looked out the window. The snow was covering everything. It was covering the dirt, the trash, the cracks in the pavement. It made the world look clean. But I knew what was underneath. I knew the rot was still there. I don't have a son, Abernathy, I said. My son died the moment he sat down to eat turkey while his child froze. The man in that house is a stranger, and he is trespassing on my property. Understood, Abernathy said. The destruction protocol is active. Good night, Mr. Vance. I hung up the phone. I tossed it back into the glove box. I sat there for a moment in the silence. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. It is a heavy thing to destroy your own blood. It is a heavy thing to realize that the legacy you tried to build was poison. But then I thought of Leo. I thought of his little nod. I thought of the way he looked at me like I was the only solid thing in a world of ice. I put the truck in gear. The engine rumbled a deep, reliable sound. I wasn't going home. I was going to the hospital. I was going to sit in a plastic chair next to a hospital bed and watch my grandson sleep. And while I watched him, I was going to wait for the sun to rise. Because when the sun came up, Brad's world was going to go dark. And I wanted to be awake to see it. I pulled out onto the empty road, my tires cutting fresh tracks in the snow. The city was sleeping. The suburbs were quiet. Behind the walls of those big, expensive houses, people were dreaming of Black Friday sales and leftover turkey. They didn't know that a storm was coming. A storm made of legal briefs and foreclosure notices. And I was the eye of the hurricane. Drive, I told myself. Just drive. The night was far from over. St. Jude's Hospital was a fortress of glass and steel against the night sky, a beacon of sterile light in the blizzard. I parked the truck in the emergency bay, ignoring the signs reserved for ambulances. I carried Leo in through the sliding doors. He was conscious now, but lethargic, his head resting heavy against my shoulder. The heat of the lobby hit us, and he whimpered, burying his face in my coat. I didn't stop at the triage desk where a nurse was typing behind a glass partition. I walked straight through the waiting area past the parents holding sick babies and the teenagers with broken arms. I walked until I hit the double doors of the pediatric wing. A security guard stepped forward, his hand raising to stop me. "Sir, you can't go back there," he started. I didn't slow down. "Tell Jim Thorne that Conrad is here," I said, my voice low and hard. "Tell him I have a boy who was left in the snow." The guard hesitated. He saw something in my face, maybe the same thing the police officer had seen, or maybe he just recognized the name. He keyed his radio. Before he could speak, the doors swung open. Jim was there. He was wearing his white coat, a stethoscope around his neck, looking tired but alert. We had played poker every Tuesday night for 20 years. I had built the deck on his house. He knew me. He knew I didn't ask for favors unless the world was ending. He took one look at the bundle in my arms, and his professional mask slammed into place. "Trauma room 1, Jim barked, turning on his heel. "Get a gurney. I want a heated blanket and a cardiac monitor now." We moved fast. I laid Leo down on the bed. The nurses swarmed him, cutting away my flannel jacket, cutting away the thin t-shirt and shorts. When they exposed his body, the room went silent. It wasn't just the blue tint of his skin or the violent shivering that had returned now that he was unwrapped. It was his ribs. They were visible, pressing against his pale skin like the hull of a starving ship. His knees were knobby, too big for his legs. He looked like a bird that had fallen out of a nest. I stepped back, pressing myself into the corner of the room, trying to make myself small, trying to stay out of the way of the people who could save him. I watched them work. I watched them stick needles into his thin arms. I watched the numbers on the monitor climb slowly, agonizingly slowly. Jim worked for an hour. He ordered warm fluids. He ordered blood tests. He ordered a full skeletal survey. He didn't look at me once during the entire process. He was entirely focused on the boy. When Leo finally drifted into a chemical sleep, sedated and warming up, Jim stepped away from the bed. He stripped off his gloves and threw them in the biohazard bin. He walked over to me. His face was gray. "We need to talk, Conrad," he said. "Not here." He led me to a small office down the hall. It was filled with medical journals and photos of his own grandchildren. He closed the door and locked it. He didn't offer me a seat. He leaned against his desk and crossed his arms. "You said you found him outside," Jim said. "In the snow," I confirmed. "By the exhaust vent, wearing summer clothes." "That explains the hypothermia," Jim said. "His core temp was 94. He is lucky. Another hour and his heart would have gone into arrhythmia. But the cold isn't what worries me, Conrad." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "What is it?" Jim picked up a clipboard. He flipped a page. "He is 10 years old, Conrad. He weighs 52 pounds. He should be nearly 80. This isn't just skipping a meal. This is chronic malnutrition. His body has started to consume its own muscle mass. He has vitamin deficiencies that I usually only see in famine victims." I gripped the back of a chair. My knuckles turned white. "Monica put him on a diet," I whispered. "She told me he was getting chubby. She said she was watching his sugar." "She was watching him starve," Jim corrected. "But that isn't all." He flipped another page. He pulled out an X-ray film and slapped it onto the light box on the wall. He flicked the switch. The image of a child's ribcage and arm bones glowed in the dim room. Jim pointed to a faint line on the left radius, the forearm bone. "See this?" he asked. "This is a calcified fracture. It is about 6 months old. It healed poorly, likely without a cast." He moved his finger to the ribs. "And here, 2 rib fractures, maybe 3 months old. And here on the tibia, a hairline fracture." He turned off the light. The room plunged back into shadows. "These aren't playground injuries, Conrad. These are defensive wounds. The arm fracture is what we call a nightstick fracture. It happens when you raise your arm to block a blow. I felt the bile rising in my throat. I had to swallow it down. You are saying they beat him? I asked, my voice trembling. I am saying that this boy has been systematically abused for a long time, Jim said. The hypothermia tonight was just the finale. If you hadn't brought him in, he wouldn't have survived the winter. Not with his reserves this low. His body has nothing left to fight with. I sank into the chair. I put my head in my hands. I thought I had been vigilant. I thought I was paying attention. I visited every Sunday. I brought gifts. I asked him how school was. He always smiled. He always said he was fine. He wore long sleeves. He wore baggy clothes. I was blind, I groaned. I was right there, Jim. I paid for the house, I paid for the food, and I didn't see it. Abusers are masters of camouflage, Jim said gently, and kids protect their parents, even the bad ones. It is a survival instinct. They think if they are good enough, the hitting will stop. He put a hand on my shoulder. I have to call Child Protective Services, Conrad. It is mandatory. The police are already involved because of the incident at the house, but I have to file a medical report. This goes beyond negligence. This is criminal assault. Do it, I said. Do it, I lifted my head. File everything. Document every bruise. Every missing pound. I want a paper trail so thick they can't breathe under it. I will, Jim promised. He is safe here tonight. I put a security hold on his room. No one gets in without a badge or your permission. I stood up. I felt old, older than my 66 years, but I also felt a new purpose. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical determination. Can I sit with him? I asked. Of course, Jim said. I walked back to the trauma room. Leo was sleeping. He looked peaceful, surrounded by machines and warming blankets. There was a plastic bag on the chair in the corner. It contained the few personal effects they had cut off him. And sitting on top of the pile of wet clothes was a bear. It was a small brown teddy bear. One eye was missing. The fur was matted and worn. It was a cheap thing, something you would win at a county fair. I walked over and picked it up. My heart hammered against my ribs again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. A month ago, I had stopped by the house unannounced. Leo was in his room. He was crying. When I came in, he wiped his tears and said he had just scraped his knee. But I saw the way he flinched when Monica walked past the door. I saw the way Brad ignored him. My gut had screamed at me then. It told me something was wrong. But I didn't have proof. I couldn't accuse my son of abuse based on a feeling. So I did something I wasn't proud of. Or at least I wasn't proud of it then. Now I felt like a genius. I had taken the bear. I told Leo I was going to fix the missing eye. I took it to my shop. I hollowed out the chest cavity. I installed a high-definition spy camera with a battery pack and a 64-gigabyte memory card. It was motion-activated. It had a microphone. I sewed it back up. I gave it back to Leo the next day. I told him to keep it on his shelf facing the room. I told him it was his guardian bear. I held the bear in my hands in the hospital room. It felt heavy. I sat down in the chair next to Leo's bed. I pulled my laptop out of my bag. I always carried it for work. I turned the bear over and found the hidden seam under the arm. I carefully cut the thread with my pocket knife. I pulled out the memory card. It was the size of a fingernail. I inserted it into the laptop. The screen flickered to life. There were dozens of files, hundreds of hours of footage. I clicked on the most recent one. The timestamp was from 3 days ago. The video opened. The angle was from the shelf looking down at Leo's bed and the door. Leo was sitting on the floor playing with a puzzle. The door slammed open. Monica walked in. She wasn't wearing her public face. Her face was twisted ugly. Get up, she snapped. Leo scrambled to his feet. I told you to clean the bathroom, she yelled. I did, Leo whispered. I scrubbed it. It is still filthy, she screamed. She grabbed him by the ear. She twisted it. I watched my grandson wince, tears springing to his eyes, but he didn't cry out. He was used to it. You are useless, she hissed. You are just a burden. You eat our food. You take up space. I am sick of looking at you. She shoved him. He fell backward, hitting his head on the bed frame. I paused the video. My hand was shaking so hard I couldn't control the mouse. I had to take a breath. I had to force myself to watch. I clicked play. Brad walked in. He stepped over Leo like he was a piece of laundry. What is the noise? Brad asked, looking at his phone. He is being difficult again, Monica said. Brad, we have to do something. I can't take another holiday with him moping around. Thanksgiving is coming up. My parents are coming. I don't want him embarrassing us. Brad looked down at his son. There was no love in his eyes. There was only annoyance. I know, Brad said. I have been making calls. Calls, Monica asked. There is a facility upstate, Brad said. A residential school for troubled youth. State-funded. We can drop him off on Monday after the holiday. We just have to sign over custody to the state. We can say he is unmanageable. We can say he is a danger to himself. Monica smiled. It was a terrifying expression. Monday, she asked. That means we could still go to Cabo for Christmas. Without him. Exactly, Brad said. We just have to get through Thanksgiving. Just keep him out of sight. Lock him in his room. Or better yet, put him in the basement. Just keep him away from your parents. He is going to ruin the dinner, Monica complained. If he makes one sound, Brad said, his voice cold and flat. If he breaks one thing, I will throw him out in the snow myself. I don't care if he freezes. I am done. I am done pretending to be a father to a mistake. The video ended. I sat in the silence of the hospital room. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of Leo's heart monitor. A mistake. That is what my son called his own flesh and blood. A mistake. They were planning to dump him. They were going to drive him to an orphanage, sign away their rights, and fly to Mexico to drink margaritas on a beach. They had planned it. They had discussed it like they were discussing taking out the trash. I ejected the memory card. I held it in my hand. It felt hot like a live coal. This wasn't just evidence of abuse. This was evidence of conspiracy. This was proof that everything that happened tonight wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of a plan to discard a human being. I looked at Leo. He was sleeping soundly, his chest rising and falling. He was safe. For the first time in years, he was truly safe. I put the memory card in my shirt pocket right over my heart. I picked up my phone. I dialed Abernathy. It was 3 a.m. I didn't care. Conrad Abernathy answered on the first ring. He was still awake. He was probably still filing injunctions. I have something else, I said. My voice was raspy. What is it? He asked. I have video, I said. I have video of them planning to abandon him. I have video of the physical abuse. I have Brad calling his son a mistake and threatening to freeze him to death days before he actually did it. There was a silence on the line. A heavy, pregnant silence. Send it to me, Abernathy said. Send it all. I will, I said. But Abernathy. Yes. When you file the petition for custody, when you file the restraining order, I want you to add something. What is it? I want you to file a civil suit, I said, for damages, for pain and suffering, for every single bruise on this boy's body. I want to sue them for every penny they have left, and I want to use that money to start a trust for Leo. We can do that, Abernathy said. With this video, we can do anything. We can bury them, Conrad. Good, I said. Bring a shovel. I hung up. I leaned back in the chair. I watched my grandson sleep. Outside the window, the snow had stopped falling. The sky was beginning to turn a dark, bruised purple in the east. Morning was coming. Black Friday was here. And my son was about to wake up to a world where he owned nothing. Not his house, not his car, not his job, and most importantly, not his son. I closed my eyes just for a moment. I wasn't tired. I was ready. The sun was coming up, and I had a front row seat to the apocalypse. The sun rose over Chicago on Black Friday, looking like a bruised eye, purple and swollen behind the gray clouds. I hadn't slept. I spent the night in the plastic chair next to Leo's bed, listening to the steady beep of the cardiac monitor and the soft hum of the warming blanket. He was stable. He was safe. But outside those hospital walls, the demolition had begun. I didn't need to be there to see it. I had the notifications on my phone. I had the alerts from the bank. And I had the play-by-play text messages from the private security team I had hired to shadow my son and his wife. At 10 in the morning, while most people were fighting over flat-screen televisions at Walmart, Monica and her mother were walking into the Hermes boutique on Oak Street. They weren't looking for deals. They were looking for dopamine. They were looking for a way to pretend that the night before hadn't happened. Monica was wearing sunglasses indoors to hide her puffy eyes, but she walked with that same entitled strut, her heels clicking on the marble floor like she owned the place. According to the security report, they spent an hour browsing. They picked out a scarf. They picked out a handbag. A Birkin. The kind of bag that costs more than the first house I ever built. The price tag was $12,000. Monica didn't even look at it. She just handed it to the sales clerk with a bored expression, as if she were buying a pack of gum. She pulled out the black American Express card. The heavy metal one. The one that makes a specific clunk sound when it hits the glass counter. It was a supplementary card on my account, issued to Brad, which he had foolishly given to her. She waited. She tapped her manicured nails on the glass. She was probably already thinking about the Instagram post she was going to make. Retail therapy. Blessed. Then the machine beeped. It wasn't the happy beep of approval. It was the low, flat tone of rejection. The clerk frowned. She tried it again. Beep. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the clerk said, her voice dropping to that polite whisper they use when they don't want to embarrass the clientele. "The card has been declined." Monica laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That is impossible," she snapped. "Run it again. It has no limit." "It says, 'Do not honor,'" the clerk said. Monica's mother stepped in. "Here, use mine," she said, pulling out a gold Visa. It was linked to the family investment firm account, the same firm that was currently being locked out of their office in the Millennium Tower. Beep. Declined. "Try this one," Monica said, frantically digging through her purse. She pulled out a debit card. Declined. A store credit card. Declined. By now, a line had formed behind them. The other shoppers were watching. The silence in the boutique was thick and heavy. The illusion of wealth, the only thing Monica and her mother had to offer the world, was evaporating in real time. "There must be a mistake," Monica screeched. Her voice was rising, cracking. "We are victims of identity theft. My father-in-law, he is crazy. He hacked our accounts." The store manager stepped forward. He was a man who had seen everything. He looked at the screen. He looked at the black card still sitting on the counter. "Ma'am," the manager said firmly, "the issuer has flagged this card as stolen property. I am required to confiscate it." He picked up the card. He picked up the heavy pair of scissors they keep under the counter. And right there in front of the ladies who lunch and the tourists He cut the black metal card in half. No, Monica screamed. You can't do that. That is my card. Please leave the store, the manager said, before I call security. Monica ran. She didn't walk. She ran out of the store, her mother trailing behind her, leaving the $12,000 bag on the counter. She stood on the sidewalk in the cold, and she did exactly what I knew she would do. She pulled out her phone and called Brad. I could almost hear the conversation. She was screaming about humiliation. She was demanding he fix it. She was demanding he transfer money. She was demanding he kill me. But Brad couldn't answer. Brad was having a very bad morning of his own. While Monica was getting evicted from Hermes, Brad was walking into the headquarters of Sterling Construction. He was the vice president of operations. It was a job I had created for him. I had set up Sterling Construction 10 years ago as a subsidiary of Helix Corp to handle mid-level commercial contracts. I had installed a board of directors who answered only to me, and I had told them to hire Brad. He thought he got the job because of his resume. He thought he was a self-made man. He didn't know he was playing in a sandbox I had built. He walked in late, around 10:30. He looked like hell. His suit was rumpled. He hadn't shaved. He marched past the receptionist without a word and went straight to his corner office. He slammed the door. He probably poured himself a drink. He needed to feel powerful again. He needed to sit in his leather chair and look at his view of the city and tell himself that he was still the king. He picked up his office phone to call his assistant. The line was dead. He tried to log into his computer. Access denied. Your account has been disabled. Please contact the administrator. He was just staring at the screen, confused, when the door opened. It wasn't his assistant. It wasn't the IT guy. It was Abernathy. My lawyer was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Brad's car. He was flanked by two large men in dark blazers, private security. And behind them stood the actual CEO of Sterling Construction, a man named Mr. Henderson, whom Brad had always treated with mild contempt because he thought Henderson worked for him. What is going on? Brad demanded, standing up. Who let you in here, Abernathy? Get out of my office. My computer is down. Fix it. Mr. Abernathy is here representing the majority shareholder, Henderson said quietly. Majority shareholder. Brad scoffed. We are a public company. You are a privately held subsidiary of Helix Corporation, Abernathy corrected. And Helix is solely owned by Conrad Vance. Brad froze. He looked at Abernathy. He looked at Henderson. The color drained from his face faster than the blood from a wound. My dad, Brad whispered. My dad owns this place. He owns the chair you are sitting in, Abernathy said. He owns the desk. He owns the phone that isn't working. And until 5 minutes ago, he owned your employment contract. Abernathy tossed a thick envelope onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. What is this? Brad asked, his voice trembling. Notice of termination, Abernathy said. Effective immediately. For cause, Brad shouted. I am the VP of operations. You can't just fire me. I have a contract. I have severance. Clause 4, Section C. Abernathy recited from memory. Conduct detrimental to the reputation of the company. Moral turpitude. Criminal charges involving a minor. The news had traveled fast. Or rather, Abernathy had made sure it traveled fast. You were arrested last night for child endangerment, Henderson said, looking at Brad with pure disgust. You left a child to freeze in the snow. We build homes, Brad. We don't employ monsters who destroy them. You are a liability. You are done. This is a setup, Brad yelled. My father is doing this. He is vindictive. He is thorough, Abernathy corrected. Now the assets. One of the security guards stepped forward. He held out a plastic bin. Company phone, the guard said. Brad clutched his iPhone. It's my personal phone. The bill is paid by Sterling Construction, Abernathy said. It is company property. Hand it over, and the laptop, and the keys to the office. Brad hesitated. The guard didn't. He reached out and plucked the phone from Brad's hand. He took the laptop from the desk. And the keys to the Range Rover, Abernathy added. No. Brad screamed. No. That is my car. It's in my name. It is a company lease, Abernathy said. A perk of the position you no longer hold. The tow truck is downstairs. Hand over the fob or we will report it stolen. And I don't think you need another felony charge on your record right now, do you? Brad looked around the office. He looked at the framed photos of himself shaking hands with politicians. He looked at the awards on the shelf. It was all vanishing. The facade was crumbling, revealing the nothingness underneath. He reached into his pocket. He threw the key fob at Abernathy. It missed and hit the wall. I am going to sue you, Brad spat. I am going to sue my father. I am going to take everything he has. Abernathy laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. With what money, Brad? Your trust fund is frozen. Your bank accounts have been flagged for investigation regarding the misappropriation of Helix assets. Your credit cards are dead. You don't have a retainer for a lawyer. You don't even have bus fare. Brad slumped back into his chair, but then he remembered he didn't own the chair. He stood up, swaying slightly. You can't do this, he whispered. I am his son. That is the only reason you aren't in prison for fraud already, Abernathy said. Now escort him out. The security guards grabbed Brad by the arms. They didn't drag him, but they guided him with a firmness that left no room for argument. They walked him out of the corner office. They walked him past the rows of cubicles. The office was silent. 50 employees were watching. They saw the arrogance drain out of him. They saw the VP who used to yell at interns being marched out like a common thief. They saw the truth. They walked him to the elevator. They rode down with him to the lobby. They pushed him out the revolving doors onto the sidewalk. It was still snowing. Brad stood there in his suit without a coat, because he had left it in the closet upstairs, and the guards hadn't let him get it. He watched as a tow truck backed up to his black Range Rover. He watched the hook attached to the axle. He watched his car, his pride, being lifted into the air and dragged away into the traffic. His phone was gone. His wallet was full of useless plastic. His wife was somewhere in the city screaming into a void. He stood on the curb, shivering just like Leo had shivered. And for the first time in his life, Bradley Vance was exactly what he had called me. A failure. A man with nothing. I checked my phone in the hospital room. Abernathy had sent a simple text message. Asset recovery complete. Target neutralized. I looked at Leo. He was awake. He was eating a cup of warm broth. He looked at me with big, tired eyes. Is Dad coming? Leo asked softly. I brushed the hair off his forehead. No, Leo, I said. He isn't coming. He has some business to attend to. What kind of business? Leo asked. The business of learning what winter feels like, I thought. He is moving, I said aloud. We all are. Leo didn't ask where. He just leaned back into the pillow and closed his eyes. He trusted me, and that trust was worth more than all the skyscrapers in Chicago. But the day wasn't over. Brad was down, but he wasn't out. He still had one thing left to lose. He still had his family, or what was left of it. And I knew, as sure as I knew concrete hardens, that he would try to claw his way back. He would try to use Leo as a bargaining chip. He didn't know about the camera in the teddy bear. He didn't know about the DNA test I had run a month ago, the results of which were sitting in my safe, a time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. I stood up and stretched. My back cracked. I felt strong. Let them come, I whispered to the empty room. Let them try. I was just getting started. Brad and Monica took a taxi home from the city. They didn't have a choice. The Range Rover was sitting in an impound lot in South Chicago, and Monica's black card was in two pieces in a trash can on Oak Street. They sat in the back of a yellow cab that smelled of stale pine air freshener and desperation. I imagined the silence between them was louder than the engine. Brad stripped of his title and his toys. Monica stripped of her dignity and her shopping bags. They were heading back to the one thing they thought they still had. The sanctuary. The fortress. The house in Naperville. They probably thought they could regroup. They probably thought they could call a lawyer, drink a bottle of wine, and spin this into a story where they were the victims. They thought they could go home and lock the door against the world. They were wrong. The taxi turned onto the cul-de-sac. It was snowing again, a light dusting that covered the neighborhood in white. But as they approached the driveway, the white snow was broken by shapes. Colorful, chaotic, jagged shapes scattered across the front lawn, like debris from a plane crash. The driver stopped at the curb. "That will be $60, he said. Brad patted his pockets. He didn't have his wallet. He had left it in his office desk, the desk he was escorted away from by security. He looked at Monica. She dug through her purse and threw a handful of crumpled bills at the driver. It wasn't enough, but they got out anyway before he could yell at them. They stood on the sidewalk. They looked at the house. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a landfill. Their belongings were on the lawn, not in boxes, not in stacks. They had been removed with a speed and efficiency that bordered on violence. The white velvet sofa, the one Leo wasn't allowed to touch, was sitting in a snowbank upside down. The cushions were soaked. The expensive Persian rug was rolled up and leaning against the mailbox, gathering ice. Brad's golf clubs were spilled across the driveway like pickup sticks. Monica screamed. It wasn't a word. It was a primal sound of loss. She ran toward the pile. She saw her clothes, her silk blouses, her cashmere sweaters, her designer jeans. They were piled in a heap on the frozen grass. The wind was picking up, blowing lace underwear across the yard like confetti. "My paintings," Monica shrieked, grabbing a canvas that was face down in the slush. It was a modern art piece she had paid $5,000 for. The frame was cracked. The canvas was wet. Brad just stood there. He was looking at the front door. The broken door I had kicked in the night before was gone. It had been boarded up with plywood. And standing in front of the plywood, arms crossed, wearing a thick shearling coat and a cowboy hat, was the sheriff. Sheriff Miller was a man who didn't like domestic disputes on holidays. He liked order. And right now he was holding a piece of paper that represented the ultimate order. Brad walked up the driveway, his expensive Italian shoes slipping on the ice. "What is this?" Brad shouted, his voice cracking. "What is going on? Why is my stuff on the lawn? Arrest whoever did this." Sheriff Miller didn't blink. He watched Brad approach. He saw a man in a suit who looked like he had been dragged through a hedge backward. "You Bradley Vance?" the sheriff asked. "Yes, I am Bradley Vance," Brad yelled. "I live here. This is my house." "Not anymore," a voice said from the shadows of the porch. Abernathy stepped into the light. He looked immaculate. His coat was wool, his scarf was cashmere, and his expression was as cold as the wind coming off the lake. He held a leather binder. "Mr. Vance," Abernathy said, "you have been served with an immediate eviction notice pursuant to the terms of your lease agreement with the Helix Trust." "Lease," Brad spat. "I don't have a lease, I have a deed." "You have a tenancy at will," Abernathy corrected, "which was terminated at 9 a.m. this morning. The locks have been changed, the security code has been reset, and the property has been reclaimed by the owner." "The owner is my father," Brad screamed. "He can't do this." "The owner is a trust," Abernathy said calmly. "And the trust has a zero-tolerance policy for criminal activity on the premises, specifically child endangerment and domestic abuse. Section 14, paragraph C." Monica came running up, clutching a wet fur coat to her chest. My parents, she gasped. Where are my parents? They were inside. Abernathy pointed toward the garage. Monica's parents, the aristocrats, were sitting on their Louis Vuitton suitcases in the open garage bay. They were wrapped in blankets, shivering. They looked like refugees from a country club that had been bombed. They weren't screaming anymore. They were in shock. They had been escorted out of the house by the private security team Abernathy had hired. They had watched as movers cleared the house in 4 hours. They had tried to call their lawyer, but their lawyer hadn't answered, probably because their own office lease had been terminated an hour earlier. You can't do this, Monica yelled at the sheriff. This is illegal eviction. We have rights. We have 30 days. You have to give us 30 days. The sheriff looked at Abernathy. Abernathy opened the binder. He pulled out a document stamped by a judge. Emergency order of possession, Abernathy said. Granted due to the imminent threat of damage to the property and the severity of the criminal charges filed against the occupants. The judge was quite sympathetic when he saw the photos of the boy in the snow. He signed it while eating his leftover turkey sandwich. The sheriff nodded. It is legal, folks. The writ of possession has been executed. You are no longer residents. You are trespassers. Brad looked at the house. He looked at his life scattered on the lawn. He looked at the neighbors who were starting to peek out from behind their curtains. The humiliation was total. The king of the cul-de-sac was being dethroned in front of an audience. I am not leaving, Brad said. He tried to push past the sheriff. I am going inside. It is freezing. Sheriff Miller put a hand on Brad's chest. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a wall. Sir, if you take one more step toward that door, I will arrest you for trespassing and disorderly conduct. You are already out on bail for the child endangerment charge. Do you really want to spend the weekend in county lockup? Brad stopped. He looked at the sheriff's gun. He looked at Abernathy's smug face. He realized he had no power. The money was gone. The influence was gone. The bluff had been called. But my stuff, Monica wailed. My jewelry, my clothes. It is all wet. It is ruined. Abernathy checked his watch. It was a Patek Philippe. I had given it to him when we won the labor dispute of '98. You have 10 minutes, Abernathy said. 10 minutes for what Brad asked. To collect your personal effects and vacate the premises, Abernathy said. The security team is scheduled to clear the lawn and transport the remaining items to a storage facility. If you aren't gone in 10 minutes, the sheriff will assist you. 10 minutes? Monica screamed. We can't pack in 10 minutes. We don't have a car. Our car was stolen. Repossessed, Abernathy corrected. And I suggest you start picking. It was a scene from a tragedy or a comedy depending on which side of the window you were standing on. I was watching from down the street sitting in my truck with the lights off. I saw them scramble. The aristocrats didn't move. They just sat on their suitcases and wept. But Brad and Monica, they turned into animals. They ran into the yard. Monica was grabbing handfuls of clothes. She was stuffing wet sweaters into a garbage bag the movers had left. She was slipping on the ice, falling, getting up and screaming at Brad to help her. Brad was wandering aimlessly. He picked up a golf club. He put it down. He picked up a box of electronics. The bottom fell out, and his gaming console crashed into a puddle. He stared at it. He looked like a man who had been lobotomized. Grab the jewelry box, Monica screamed at him. Find the jewelry box. Brad dug through a pile of bedding. He found the box. He clutched it to his chest. He looked around for something else. He saw a framed photo of himself receiving an award. He picked it up. He saw his diploma. He picked that up. He didn't look for Leo's things. He didn't look for the family photo albums. He looked for the trophies. He looked for the evidence that he was somebody. The wind howled. The snow fell harder. They were soaked. They were freezing. They were experiencing exactly 1% of what they had forced Leo to endure. Sheriff Miller looked at his watch. 2 minutes, he called out. Monica was dragging a suitcase across the lawn. It was heavy. One of the wheels broke. She cursed. She kicked the suitcase. She looked at the house, the warm lighted windows, and she let out a sound of pure misery. "Why is this happening?" she shouted at the sky. "What did we do? You forgot who fed you," I whispered from the cab of my truck. "Time is up," the sheriff boomed. "Step away from the property. Move to the public sidewalk." They dragged their bags to the curb. They stood there, a little cluster of shivering misery. Brad in his ruined suit. Monica in her wet dress. The parents wrapped in blankets. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck washing up on a hostile shore. Abernathy walked down the driveway. He stopped at the edge of the property line. He didn't cross it. He maintained the boundary. "Here is the card for the storage facility," Abernathy said, tossing a business card onto the wet pavement near Brad's feet. "The first month is paid. After that, it is on you, assuming you have the funds." Brad didn't pick up the card. He just stared at Abernathy. "Tell my father," Brad said, his voice hollow. "Tell him he won. Tell him he killed his son." Abernathy adjusted his scarf. "Your father didn't kill you, Brad," he said. "He just stopped carrying you." "There is a difference." Abernathy turned and walked back toward the house. He signaled the security team. 2 large vans pulled up. Men got out and started loading the rest of the debris from the lawn. They weren't gentle. They threw the furniture into the back. They tossed the boxes. They were cleaning up trash. Brad and Monica stood there for a long time. They tried to flag down a taxi, but no one stopped. They tried to call an Uber, but their phones were dying and their accounts were frozen. Eventually, they started walking. They dragged their suitcases through the snow, heading toward the main road, hoping to find a bus or a sympathetic stranger. They walked past my truck. They didn't see me. The windows were tinted and the engine was off. I watched my son walk by. He was limping. He looked broken. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a grim satisfaction. The cancer had been cut out. The surgery was successful. The patient, my life, my legacy, my grandson's future was going to survive. But as I watched them disappear into the swirling snow, I knew they weren't done. Rats don't just die when you destroy their nest. They get desperate. They get vicious. Brad had lost his house. He had lost his money. But he still had one card to play. He still had the biological claim to Leo. And once the shock wore off, once the cold set in, and the reality of his poverty hit him, he would realize that Leo was his only ticket back to the gravy train. He would sue. He would lie. He would drag us into court. I started the truck. I let the engine warm up. I pulled my phone out and texted Abernathy. Phase 1 complete. Prepare for the custody hearing. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the hospital. I had a boy to feed. And I had a war to finish. The house was just the battlefield. The real fight was for the soul of the family. And I had a weapon they didn't know about. A DNA test that was sitting in my safe waiting to detonate. Let them freeze, I thought. Let them feel the cold. It was the only way they would ever learn what warmth really meant. The family court building in downtown Chicago smelled like floor wax and broken promises. It was a place where love went to die, and lawyers went to buy vacation homes. I sat at the defendant's table next to Abernathy, my hands clasped on the scarred wood. I was wearing my only suit, a charcoal gray wool number I had bought for my wife's funeral 10 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but it made me look respectable. It made me look like a grandfather, not a vigilante who kicked down doors. Across the aisle, Brad and Monica were putting on the performance of their lives. If I hadn't known them, if I hadn't seen them sneering at waitstaff and throwing away perfectly good food, I might have bought it myself. They had undergone a complete transformation. Gone were the tailored Italian suits and the silk dresses. Gone were the Rolexes and the diamond studs. Brad was wearing a pair of khakis that looked like he had bought them at a thrift store and a blue button-down shirt that was slightly frayed at the collar. He looked humble. He looked beaten down. He looked like the working man he had never been in his life. Monica was even worse. She was wearing a simple floral dress and a cardigan. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She clutched a tissue in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes every time the judge looked her way. She looked like a grieving mother. It was nauseating. They were destitute, of course. My financial scorched earth policy had worked. They were living in a motel on the outskirts of town, driving a rental car paid for by pawning Monica's engagement ring. But they weren't here for Leo. They weren't here because they missed the sound of his laughter or the way he stomped his feet when he ran. They were here for the money. Specifically, they were here for the Helix Junior Trust. When Leo was born, I had set up an irrevocable trust in his name. $5 million. It was locked up tight until he turned 25, but there was a clause. The legal guardian of the beneficiary could petition for a monthly stipend for the care, maintenance, and education of the child. That stipend could be up to $20,000 a month. Brad knew about the trust. He had tried to tap into it before, to buy a boat, claiming it was for family recreation. I had denied him then. But if he got custody of Leo now, if he could prove to a judge that I was unfit, and that he was the struggling, loving father, he could petition the court to force the trust to pay out. Leo wasn't a child to them. He was a winning lottery ticket. He was their way back into the country club. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Harrison walked in. He was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face etched with the fatigue of listening to people lie to him for 30 years. He sat down and opened the file. "We are here for an emergency custody hearing regarding the minor child, Leo Vance," the judge said. The petitioners, Bradley and Monica Vance, allege that the respondent, Conrad Vance, has unlawfully detained the child and is alienating him from his parents. Abernathy stood up. "Your Honor, we have filed a counter-petition for emergency guardianship based on severe abuse and neglect. We have medical records indicating hypothermia and malnutrition." "I have read the reports, Mr. Abernathy," the judge said, waving a hand. "But today we are establishing temporary placement. I want to hear from the father." Brad took the stand. He walked slowly, keeping his head down. He sat in the witness chair and looked at the judge with wide, watery eyes. "Mr. Vance," his lawyer said. "A public defender since Brad couldn't afford his usual shark. Tell the court what happened on Thanksgiving." Brad took a shaky breath. "It was a misunderstanding," Brad said, his voice trembling perfectly. "We were having a family dinner. Leo was misbehaving. He has behavioral issues, Your Honor. He breaks things. He gets aggressive. We put him in a timeout to cool down. We didn't realize how cold it was outside. It was a lapse in judgment. A terrible mistake. But we were going to bring him in. We love him." He looked at me then. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Then my father broke in. Brad continued. "He has always hated me, Your Honor. He is controlling. He uses his money to manipulate us. He kicked down our door. He assaulted my wife. He kidnapped my son. He has been planning this. He wants to take everything from me. He fired me. He evicted us. He left us with nothing. And now he wants to take my boy." He buried his face in his hands and sobbed. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He spun the truth just enough to make himself the victim. He used my wealth against me. He painted me as the tyrant king destroying the humble peasant. The judge looked at me. I saw a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. Not for me. For Brad. The judge saw a broken man. He saw a father who had lost his job and his home in one night. He didn't see the monster who called his son a mistake. Monica took the stand next. She was even better. "I love Leo like he is my own," she whispered. "I have raised him since he was 5. I cook for him. I clean for him. Yes, I am strict sometimes, but he needs structure. My father-in-law undermines us at every turn. He buys Leo expensive gifts we can't afford. He tells Leo we don't love him. He is poisoning his mind against us." She looked at the judge, her eyes pleading. "We just want our family back, Your Honor. We made a mistake with the timeout. We know that. We will take parenting classes. We will do anything. But please don't let him take our son. He is all we have left." It was the all we have left that did it. It was the hook. It appealed to the court's desire for reunification. The system is built to keep biological families together. It assumes that parents love their children. It assumes that poverty shouldn't be a reason to lose a child. They were using their new poverty, the poverty I had inflicted on them, as a shield. Judge Harrison took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy," he said, "the medical report is concerning. But the child is stable. And while the father's judgment was severe, the court generally prefers to keep children with their biological parents, especially when the alternative is a grandfather who has admittedly used his financial power to systematically dismantle the parents' lives in the last 48 hours. I felt the blood rushing to my ears. I gripped the table so hard I thought the wood would splinter. He was buying it. He was buying their act. He was going to give Leo back to them. He was going to hand the lamb back to the butchers because the butchers were crying. "Your Honor," Abernathy said, his voice calm but urgent. "This isn't just about a timeout. We have evidence of long-term abuse. We have allegations the judge corrected. Allegations from a man who just evicted his own son into the snow. This looks like a vendetta, counselor. It looks like a family feud where the child is being used as a pawn." Brad looked at me. He didn't smile. He knew better than to break character. But I saw it in his eyes. A glint of triumph. A spark of the old arrogance. He thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he could cry his way into $5 million. The judge shuffled his papers. "I am inclined to grant temporary custody to the father pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services," the judge said, "with the stipulation of mandatory parenting classes and weekly wellness checks. I don't see sufficient grounds to sever the parental rights of a biological father based on one incident, however regrettable." My heart stopped. I looked at Abernathy. He was pale. He hadn't expected the judge to be this dismissive of the medical report. We were losing. We were losing Leo to the people who wanted to put him in an orphanage. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let them take him. If they took him now, they would flee. They would take the stipend money and run to another state or another country. I would never see him again. I stood up. "Sit down," Conrad Abernathy hissed. I didn't sit down. I looked at Brad. I looked at the man who shared my last name, the man who had my eyes and my chin. I looked at the stranger who had grown in my garden like a weed. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was loud in the quiet courtroom. "Mr. Vance, you will speak through your attorney," the judge warned. "I have one more piece of evidence," I said. "Conrad." "Don't," Abernathy whispered, tugging on my sleeve. He didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't told him everything. I had saved one card, the ace of spades. The judge looked annoyed. "Is it relevant to the immediate safety of the child?" the judge asked. "It is relevant to the standing of the petitioner," I said. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Brad tensed. He thought I was pulling a gun. He would have loved that. It would have proved his point. But I didn't pull a gun. I pulled a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a medical report, but not from the emergency room. I walked toward the bench. The bailiff stepped forward to stop me, but I laid the paper on the clerk's desk. "You keep talking about the rights of the biological father," I said, turning to look at Brad. "You keep talking about blood." Brad frowned. He didn't understand. He looked at Monica. She looked confused. I looked at the judge. "I request that you read that." "Your Honor," I said. The judge picked up the paper. He adjusted his glasses. He read it. Then he read it again. His eyebrows went up. He looked at Brad. Then he looked at me. "Is this authenticated?" the judge asked. "Certified by the best lab in the state," I said. "What is this?" Brad demanded, standing up. "What are you showing him?" I turned to my son. The courtroom was silent. This was it. The final demolition. The charge that would bring the whole building down. "You said you are his father, Brad," I said quietly. "You built your whole case on being his father, on your rights, on your blood." I pointed at the paper in the judge's hand. "But you aren't," I said. Brad froze. What he whispered. "Leo isn't your son," I said. Monica let out a gasp. Brad's face went white, then red, then a color I had never seen before. "You are lying," Brad shouted. "He is mine. My wife." "She wouldn't." "She did," I said. "I had my suspicions years ago. He didn't look like you. He didn't act like you. He was kind. So I ran the test a month ago. I took a sample from his hairbrush and one from yours." I looked at the judge. "That document proves 0% probability of paternity," I said. "Bradley Vance is not the biological father of Leo Vance. He has no biological claim. He has no standing." Brad looked at Monica. He looked like a man who had just been stabbed in the back by a ghost. And then the explosion happened. But it didn't come from Brad. It came from Monica. She stood up, her face twisting into a mask of pure fury. She looked at Brad, the man she had married for money, the man she had conspired with, the man she was currently living with in a motel room. "You told me he was yours," she screamed. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." "You made me take care of another man's brat," she shrieked, lunging at Brad. "You told me I had to put up with him because he was your heir. You told me we needed him for the trust fund." She was clawing at his face. She didn't care about the judge. She didn't care about the act anymore. The money was gone. The house was gone. And now the golden ticket, the boy, was worthless to her because he wasn't even Brad's blood. "Order," the judge shouted. "Bailiff, restrain her." Brad stood there taking the blows, looking at me. He was broken. The last thing he had, his identity as a father, as the head of a legacy, was gone. He realized that for 10 years he had been raising a stranger. He realized he had abused a child that wasn't even his to abuse, and I stood there watching them tear each other apart. The truth was out. The lie was dead. And Leo was finally truly free of them. The courtroom descended into a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The bailiffs had just separated Monica and Brad, forcing them back into their chairs like unruly children. Monica was panting, her hair disheveled, her chest heaving with a rage that was finally truly real. Brad was slumped over, holding his face where she had scratched him, looking at the floor, as if he wished it would open up and swallow him whole. The judge, Judge Harrison, looked like he had just watched a train derail in slow motion. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture of pure exhaustion. He looked at the paper on his desk. The DNA test. The piece of paper that had just detonated the nuclear warhead in the middle of his courtroom. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, addressing me. His voice was quiet, respectful. "Are you telling this court that your son, that the petitioner, knew about this?" I remained standing in the witness box. I didn't look at the judge. I looked at Brad. I looked at the man I had raised, the man I had clothed and fed and educated. I looked at the stranger who had been wearing my son's face for 38 years. He knew, I said. My voice was granite. It was the voice of a man who has buried his last hope. How do you know? The judge asked. Because I asked him, I said. 5 years ago, shortly after his first wife died, I asked him if he wanted a paternity test. Leo didn't look like him. Leo didn't look like anyone in our family. He had dark eyes. Brad has blue. I have blue. And what did he say? He told me to go to hell, I said. He told me that if I ever brought it up again, he would cut me off from my grandson forever. He threatened me with the one thing he knew I cared about. I paused. I let the words hang in the air. He knew, Your Honor. He knew because his wife told him on her deathbed. I was there. I was in the hallway. I heard her crying. I heard her begging for forgiveness. I heard him tell her to shut up. Brad looked up then. His eyes were red-rimmed with panic. That's a lie, he shouted. You're lying. She never told me. You stopped visiting her grave, Brad, I said calmly. You stopped putting up pictures of her in the house. You erased her. A grieving husband doesn't erase his wife unless he hates her. You hated her because she cheated on you. But you loved the money she brought into the family. You loved the trust fund I set up for the boy. You did the math, didn't you? You calculated the cost of raising another man's son versus the payout of $5 million. And you decided the money was worth the humiliation. Liar, Brad screamed. He stood up, knocking his chair over. It clattered loudly on the floor. I loved her. I loved Leo. You loved the check, I roared back. The volume of my voice made the court reporter jump. You loved the monthly stipend. You loved the house I bought for the family. You used that boy as a hostage. You kept him around like a pet that you kick when no one is looking, because every time you looked at him, you saw the man who slept with your wife. The truth of it hit the room like a shockwave. It explained everything. It explained the cruelty. It explained the coldness. It explained why a father would leave his 10-year-old son out in the snow to freeze. He wasn't punishing a child. He was punishing a sin. He was taking his revenge on a ghost by torturing the living proof of her infidelity. Monica let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a low, guttural keen. She turned on Brad. Her eyes were wide, manic. You knew, she whispered. Her voice trembled with a fury that made her previous tantrums look like child's play. You knew he wasn't yours. Brad flinched away from her. Monica, please. You made me wash his clothes, she hissed. You made me cook for him. You made me drive him to school. You told me we had to do it for your legacy. You told me he was the heir. She stood up. The bailiff moved toward her, but she was faster. She lunged across the small space between them. She didn't scratch this time. She punched him. She hit him square in the jaw with a closed fist. I spent 5 years raising a bastard, she screamed. I put up with your brat. I put up with your father. I put up with everything because you said he was the golden ticket. She hit him again. Brad tried to cover his face, cowering like a dog. He is nothing, she shrieked. He is worthless. You made me a maid for a stranger's kid. The bailiffs were on her in seconds. They grabbed her arms and hauled her back. She was kicking and screaming, spewing a stream of profanity that would have made a sailor blush. She wasn't mad about the abuse. She wasn't mad about the lies. She was mad about the wasted effort. She was mad that she had invested her time in a stock that had zero value. Get her out of here, the judge yelled, banging his gavel. Remove her! They dragged Monica out of the courtroom. Her screams echoed down the hallway long after the doors swung shut. You lied to me. You ruined my life. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery stops. Brad was sitting on the floor, leaning against the table, bleeding from his lip. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had sold his soul for a down payment and lost both. I looked at the judge. He was pale. He looked sick. He had seen bad divorces. He had seen custody battles. But he had never seen a family disintegrate quite like this. He had never seen the raw, ugly anatomy of greed laid out on the dissecting table. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my suit jacket. I turned back to the microphone. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was quiet now. The anger was gone. It had burned itself out, leaving only a cold, hard clarity. "You have the DNA test," I continued. "You have the proof. Biologically, I am not that boy's grandfather. Legally, I have no claim. According to the blood in his veins, I am a stranger to him." I looked at Brad. He was wiping the blood from his mouth, staring at the floor. "But blood is cheap, Your Honor," I said. "Blood is just biology. It's an accident of birth. It doesn't make you a father. It doesn't make you a man." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a photo. It was old creased. It was a picture of Leo when he was 3 years old. He was sitting on my shoulders. We were at the zoo. He was laughing, his little hands gripping my hair. I was laughing too. I pointed to the man on the floor. "That man shares my DNA," I said. "He has my name. He has my blood type. But he is not my son. Not anymore. A son protects. A son honors. A son has a heart. That man, that thing, is a parasite." I turned back to the judge. "But Leo, that boy in the hospital bed, the boy who held my hand when he was scared, the boy who trusts me to fix his broken toys." I tapped the photo on the railing of the witness box. "He is my son," I said. My voice didn't waver. I felt the truth of it settle into my bones, stronger than concrete, stronger than steel. I don't care who his biological father was. I don't care if he came from a stranger. He is mine. I chose him, and he chose me. When he was freezing in the snow, he didn't call for his father. He didn't call for his mother. He waited for me. I looked at Brad. "You threw him away," I said. "You threw him away like garbage because he wasn't pure enough for you, because he was a reminder of your failure. Well, I am picking him up, I am dusting him off, and I am going to raise him to be twice the man you will ever be." I looked at the judge. "I am asking the court to grant me full permanent guardianship," I said. "I am asking you to terminate the parental rights of Bradley Vance on the grounds of abuse, neglect, and fraud. I am asking you to let me take my son home." The judge looked at me. He looked at the DNA test. He looked at Brad, who was still sitting on the floor, weeping silently, not for his lost child, but for his lost fortune. The judge picked up his pen. He wrote something on the file. He closed it with a snap. "Mr. Vance," the judge said to me, "the court finds the respondent Bradley Vance unfit. The court finds that the environment provided by the petitioners was abusive and dangerous. The court acknowledges the lack of biological relation between the minor and the respondent." He paused. He looked me in the eye. "However, the court also recognizes that parenthood is a function of action, not just biology. You saved his life, Mr. Vance. You acted in loco parentis when his legal guardians failed." The judge stamped the paper. The sound was loud final. "Emergency guardianship is granted to Conrad Vance effective immediately. Parental rights of Bradley Vance are suspended pending a termination hearing. A restraining order is issued against Bradley and Monica Vance. They are to have no contact with the minor child." The judge stood up. "And Mr. Vance," he said to me. "Yes, Your Honor, take him home." I nodded. I didn't smile. This wasn't a victory lap. This was a rescue mission. I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't look back at Brad. I didn't look at the ruin I had left behind. I walked past the lawyers, past the bailiffs, past the spectators who were whispering in shock. I walked out into the hallway. Abernathy was waiting for me. He had a briefcase in one hand and a coffee in the other. He looked at me. He raised an eyebrow. "It is done," I said. "Everything Abernathy asked. Everything I said. He is mine." Abernathy nodded. He didn't offer a high five. He didn't cheer. He just handed me a file folder. "Adoption papers," Abernathy said. "I had them drawn up just in case. We can file them as soon as the termination of rights is final. It will take a few months, but it will happen," I said. I took the papers. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the ground floor. I was going to the hospital. I was going to pack Leo's bag. I was going to take him to the new house I had bought 3 days ago, a house Brad didn't know about, a house with a fireplace and a big yard and a fence that no one could climb. I was going to sit him down. I was going to tell him the truth. Not all of it. Not yet. But enough. I was going to tell him that he didn't have to worry about being a mistake anymore. I was going to tell him that he was chosen. The elevator doors opened. I stepped out into the lobby. The winter wind was blowing outside, cold and biting. But I didn't feel it. I felt warm. I felt like a father for the first time in 30 years. I buttoned my coat. I pushed open the doors. I had a son to pick up. And this time I wasn't going to fail him. The fallout was swift and brutal, like a building collapsing after the support beams are blown. Brad and Monica didn't just divorce. They detonated. Without my money to cushion the blow, their marriage dissolved into a vicious war over who was responsible for the debt. They fought over credit card bills and legal fees with the same intensity they used to fight over vacation destinations. But there were no assets to divide, only liabilities. In the end, the judge granted the divorce by default, because neither of them could afford to pay their lawyers to keep arguing. Monica didn't just lose her marriage. She lost her freedom. The video footage from the teddy bear was admissible in court. The jury watched in horrified silence as she twisted a 10-year-old boy's ear and shoved him into a wall. They heard her planning to abandon him. They saw the monster behind the makeup. Her parents tried to bail her out, but their assets were frozen in the eviction lawsuits. Monica was sentenced to 5 years in a state penitentiary for felony child abuse and conspiracy. The last time I saw her, she was being led out of the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, screaming that it wasn't fair that she was the victim. She looked at me hoping for a savior, but she only found a witness. Brad escaped prison, but he landed in a hell of his own making. With a criminal record for child endangerment and a reputation for fraud, no construction firm in the city would touch him. The man who used to fire people for wearing the wrong tie was now unhireable. I saw him once about 6 months after the trial. I was driving past a distribution warehouse on the south side. He was on the loading dock wearing a reflective vest, wrestling with a heavy crate. He looked 10 years older. His hairline had receded and he had a hunch in his shoulders that spoke of defeat. I pulled my truck over and watched for a moment. He dropped the crate and his supervisor yelled at him. Brad didn't yell back. He didn't fire the guy. He just nodded and bent down to pick it up. He was living in a basement apartment in a neighborhood he used to make fun of, working for minimum wage to pay off court-ordered restitution. He looked up and saw my truck. Our eyes met across the distance. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just put the truck in gear and drove away. He had wanted to be a self-made man. Now he finally had his chance to start from the bottom. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of a reality he could no longer escape. He had lost his son, his father, and his dignity, and he had no one to blame but the man in the mirror. It has been exactly 365 days since I kicked down a door in Naperville. The weather outside is just as cold. The wind is howling off the lake, whipping the snow into white vortices that dance across the ice. But inside this cabin, the air is warm. It smells of burning oak logs and melted cheese. We didn't cook a turkey this year. We made an executive decision, Leo and I. We decided that turkey tastes like hypocrisy. So we ordered 3 extra-large pizzas from the local place down the road, and we are eating them right out of the box on the coffee table. I look at Leo. He is sitting on the rug wearing a thick wool sweater I bought him. He has gained 20 pounds in the last year. His cheeks are full. The shadows under his eyes are gone. He doesn't flinch when I move my hand. He doesn't ask for permission to eat a second slice. He just takes it. He laughs at a cartoon on the television, a genuine belly-shaking laugh that fills the room better than any expensive furniture ever could. We are in a cabin I built 30 years ago and never used. It sits on 10 acres of forest by the water. It isn't a mansion. It doesn't have marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It has rough-hewn beams and a stone fireplace that draws like a dream. It is solid. It is real. It is a fortress against the world, but the drawbridge is down and the moat is frozen over. Leo wipes tomato sauce off his chin and looks around the room. He looks at the fire. He looks at the stack of comic books I bought him. He looks at the lack of screaming, the lack of tension, the absolute heavy blanket of safety that covers us. Grandpa Leo asks, his voice serious. "Yeah, kid. Are we rich?" I stop chewing. I look at him. It is a fair question. He has seen the lawyers. He has seen the way people treat me when we go into town. He knows I paid cash for his new school tuition. I put down my pizza crust. I wipe my hands on a paper napkin. I don't lie to him. We have a rule now. No lies. Not ever. I have money. Leo, I say. I have a lot of it. I own buildings. I own land. But that isn't what makes you rich. He tilts his head. He doesn't share my DNA. The test proved that. He doesn't have my nose or my chin. But when he tilts his head like that, when he looks me with that sharp analytical curiosity, he is more my son than Brad ever was. Biology is an accident. Family is a choice. And I choose him every single day. I point to the window to the storm raging outside. "You see that snow?" I ask. He nods. "Last year you were out in that. Last year you were freezing because people who had money, people who had a big house and fancy cars, were poor in spirit. They were empty. They needed to hurt you to feel big." I lean forward. I look him right in the eye. Being rich isn't about the number in the bank, Leo. It is about the ability to walk away. It is about the power to say no. It is about sitting here eating pizza in a warm house knowing that no one is coming to hurt us. No one is coming to yell at us. No one is coming to put us out in the cold. I pick up my glass of cheap red wine. It tastes better than the $100 bottle Monica's father was drinking that night. "We have something money can't buy, Leo," I say. "What is that?" he asks. "We have freedom," I say. "We have the freedom from the bastards. We have the freedom from the people who think love is a transaction. We cut the cancer out, kid. And now we are just healing." Leo smiles. He understands. He grabs another slice of pizza. "I like being rich," then he says. "Me too, kid," I say. "Me too." I look out the window one last time. Somewhere out there, Brad is probably cold. Somewhere, Monica is probably angry. But they are ghosts to me now. They are just shadows in the snow. I turn back to the fire. I turn back to my son. "Eat up," I say. "We have got dessert coming. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly what I am thankful for. I learned that blood doesn't make a family. Actions do. I spent 40 years building skyscrapers believing legacy was about steel and stone or the size of an inheritance. I was wrong. Legacy is who sits beside you when the storm hits. My biological son chased status until he lost his soul. I chased the truth and found a real son in a boy who didn't share my blood. To anyone listening who feels trapped by toxic relatives just because of a last name you aren't, you can walk away. You can build your own shelter. True wealth isn't what you own. It's who you protect. That is the only fortune that survives the winter. If you agree that family is defined by love rather than DNA, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories where justice is served cold.